During the Pledge of Allegiance, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My bag out, so I didn't block the sign back there. First item is review of comments received on proposed North Broadway zoning.
Right, I made a list. What I did was I went through all the correspondence we got on this, that since the last draft, and I have them all on here, which is where Mary is.
Thank you.
I don't know.
I have that.
You know, if you guys want to
Thanks so much.
follow along,
Pass one back.
Chad, if you guys want to follow along.
One more right there.
Thank you.
And I guess they're just in kind of the order that they came in, not necessarily order of importance, so some of them were looking at others, but I think that there haven't been any new issues raised, so I think if we're able to resolve this, we're ready to go forward. We should probably be ready to go forward with the zoning.
Was there anything new in this that just came like a half an hour ago that we didn't have before?
But you elaborate somewhat.
Okay.
Just an expansion, if I may.
Pardon?
It's just an expansion of our prior request.
Yeah.
Clarification, I should say.
Maybe it'll be it.
We'll start there.
Okay, so, one of the first comment on the list here is, somebody asked why there was a limitation on 15 units per building for multi-family residences. Well, the reason there is what was done was it took the zoning from the MF, the zoning from our regular MF district and just, and that has a limit of 15 units per building. But, it was John Sheen who commented that and said that there's no such limitation on the size of assisted living facilities. It's also not consistent with preserving as much open space as possible. My thinking on that is it makes a lot of sense. You know, and I don't think we were ever talking, I mean, that doesn't mean you couldn't have buildings that are that size, but, so it's just a suggestion, and just take that, yeah, and then, just eliminate that limitation.
Would you have an upper limit?
No, I mean, what do you care if it's only one building? You know, you've got your coverage limits.
We do have total unit count limit, or do we
Oh,
not?
yeah, well, sure, this doesn't get you around the total unit count. It just
for
says,
building.
well, let's say you allowed 120 units. Under this one, you'd have to have 8 buildings.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. We don't
No,
want to
no.
proliferate buildings for no
Yeah,
reason.
okay, so I think we're okay with that.
I think
Okay.
that's keeps with the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, okay. Then, comments from the Strawberry Lane people were to eliminate restaurants as a permitted use. I think the board's pretty happy.
Yeah, I think it's almost related.
We've ordered out already.
I mean, I think it's kind of related to the next item too, like you're almost taking the 2 and 3 together.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you say eliminate, you don't have to talk about the next one, but
Right.
if we don't say eliminate it, then we can talk about the next one.
Yeah, and that set restaurants should be allowed only if they have direct access to Broadway or put a size limit on restaurants.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's some disagreement on the board. I mean, I personally am okay with saying they have direct access to Broadway, because I think the only property that can't come up with a creative solution to that is probably the Abbott House. So I think I might be in the minority there, so.
But I was thinking we should rework this though, in a way, it shouldn't necessarily be direct access to Broadway, like necessarily that it should be access. That's really, you know what I'm saying? Because if they get a easement through if Maxon, whoever the owner is, gets an easement through the next property over, the old Carfiola property, and then from there gets onto Broadway, is that legally considered direct access?
Yeah,
Even if it indirectly goes through their side streets and all that kind of stuff.
I guess you could say, you just come out and say that they can't, if that's what you wanted to do. Say, but you can't access via Strawberry Lane.
That's effectively what we've been saying all
I think
along.
that's, I think it's just a different way of
That's the
saying
real
it.
issue.
Yeah.
So easement is fine. If you can work out an easement, then you're good to go.
Yeah.
Now, the only thing, Rand, before, I mean, there was the discussion brought up by, earlier about the idea of what about if you came out right at the base of Strawberry Lane?
Similar question.
My concern has always been about that is that that corner of Strawberry Lane is a problem, no matter how you come out and enlarge it to allow a second lane, like right at the entrance, it's still a problem. So I don't see how that, you know, coming down all the way like on the side behind the wall and then cutting into Strawberry Lane right at the intersection. To me, it's still, that intersection is still a problem because of visibility. And so it doesn't seem to really solve the problem just by saying we only touch the first 30 feet or 20 feet of Strawberry Lane. I guess it just seems, that's kind of a non-solution.
That wasn't what I was gonna say.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's not that you're sorry, but, you know, I thought that we had discussed that we have, you know, part of it that any potential new owner of property that uses Strawberry Lane would be responsible for making Strawberry Lane an accessible road. So are we saying that even if they can do that, they still can't have a restaurant? That's my question.
Well, that's what's,
Right. So even if Strawberry Lane can be improved in a way that is acceptable, there still can't be a restaurant? Is that what we're saying?
No, that's not what we're saying. I like the way you're characterizing it. So
well,
yes,
no,
it's-
that is what you've said so far. I mean, the
Right, and I just want to make sure that that's what everybody's saying.
I think that's what I'm saying, mostly because I think it's much more, I think it's the potential, even if you say like, you know, it's gonna be a 6-table fancy French bistro that then turns into a burger place, you know, I think that's the fear, right? So we're trying to avoid potential increase in traffic even on a new, you know, Autobahn like Strawberry Lane. So, you
No
know,
speed limit, is it?
no speed limit.
No, thanks.
It's a private road. So, you know, I think that to me, it's more keeping the traffic off of Strawberry Lane more than, maybe it's no exit via Strawberry Lane, you know, so that way you can come in that way.
So whatever the use would be at either the two properties which are affected by Strawberry Lane, if an ancillary part of that use was a restaurant, we wouldn't allow that.
Well, I think we've talked about ancillary use as being a little bit different than a standalone restaurant. I mean, a facility often has, maybe it's not called a restaurant, they have dining facilities for employees or visitors, so that's different than a.
Well,
I'm
that's,
talking
yeah,
about
but
something
the-
open to the public.
yeah, I mean,
Would be, wouldn't it? I would imagine.
well, there's two, there actually, it's a good, it's a good question. It's sometimes, you know, like almost any conference center is gonna have a restaurant connected, with it, but sometimes it's a standalone restaurant. You can see that at Terrytown House. Has frequently has standalone restaurants besides.
About, it's kind of the camel's head in the tent, nose in the tent, or whatever. Let's say that, I don't know, I'm thinking about change of use and, from a restaurant, from like a small bistro, let's use that, you know, or a small contained restaurant to like a burger giant, fast food.
Right, I understand that argument that once a restaurant is there, we then can't control a change of use of that restaurant to something that we might not want. So I'm just
Especially,
throwing it out for discussion.
especially if somehow the first restaurant got through without having to make major changes to Strawberry Lane, but the second one would end up creating a worst-case scenario for Strawberry Lane. If they, you know, I don't know what the access points would be, but you could see how it could, because they're not gonna, they're just changing ownership. Use, right? So they wouldn't have to go back through the planning process. So is,
Wouldn't that be true of any change of existing use that would happen in those properties? You know, if, I'm trying to think of an example that's, you know, similar to an example of a restaurant becoming
I think
Initial
the restaurant's an office, but I think part of the issue
So if it
was,
becomes an office space, that
With
instead
much
of
more
having
turnover,
small,
yeah,
right, you know,
I think the
it becomes a
difference
call
is-
center.
it's the office hours were what some people brought up, that they're typically, let's say, 8 to 6 or whatever, and it's typically not on weekends where, you know, the restaurant's busiest time are gonna be weekends and kind of hours when people are home, you know, starting at 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock at night, and, you know, Saturday and Sunday as well, where it's an office use, even a heavier used office, you know, it's quieter at night when people are at home. I think it's the best part.
But not necessarily on the weekends. I mean, office space can be used on the weekends as well.
Office, you know, has kind of Monday through Friday hours still, even if there's people there, it's typically not as crowded, where Saturday is gonna be the most crowded day for the rest of the evening.
So I guess my question about restaurants per se, and the idea that we somehow lose control when there's a change in ownership. But can't there be built in some controls that aren't about the type of food they have, but any safety things that happen, or, you know, we're talking about the intersection not being safe? Can it come back to us above and beyond what, if the planning board plays no role when that change of use happens, aren't there certain features that could come back to us by the way we put it into our law? So that we're protected that might happen by different, even though it's the same use, there are certain criteria that have to be met in that use, and they can't go beyond that. They can't create an unsafe situation by having, you know, too much traffic at that intersection, or they have too much noise. I mean, other kinds of ways to control it.
Significant change in traffic use, would that be something that
That
the planning board would
kicks
be able
in.
to then make a different decision about? If the use, you know, if it went from a Michelin-starred restaurant to a Burger King, not a chain, but a burger and shake place, that then would be demonstrated that the traffic use at that intersection would change from a
That's the
huge
kind of
to
thing,
a
that's the kind of thing I'm talking about,
I
Larry.
mean, I guess you could write in whatever you want to, but why would you just distinguish between businesses? What about if it's an office that's there, for instance, Maxon is there now that doesn't have a lot, doesn't have a lot of business traffic, but it could, let's say it's
Right.
something that has a lot, so.
Right.
Oh, so you're saying that for any.
Yeah, there are controls that kind of back in.
There's a change, you know, because of our concern about traffic particularly. I mean, that's our concern about all of this development coming on Broadway. The effect it's gonna have on traffic. And, you know, well, it's one of our.
Yeah, traffic, noise, light, I mean, all those things, but they can control them, not by saying, oh, but not restaurants. But I wouldn't be in favor of cutting out the use of restaurants. I think we should leave that in as a use.
I think we
Okay.
can all say, leave it in. Now, do they have to have access to Broadway?
Well, I always thought that just coming down at the of Strawberry Lane could work, but only if things that you're bringing up were met. I mean, if it's impossible by safety, then it's impossible and it wouldn't be approved. But if it were, then,
Well, they don't control the land on the south side of the street, of the intersection, so and that's the wall that's gray. It's the primary problem of visibility, especially coming out of Strawberry Lane. You have to pull out so far. So, I mean, there's other ways around it, but it just seems like, you could try to get the Department of Transportation to put light in, change the light.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly, but what's realistic? So,
But-
but the
Yeah,
other thing,
I hear you, Mark, and I'm trying to, what would the planning board do if a proposal was made that was judged to be creating an unsafe intersection? Okay, then it wouldn't be approved.
Yeah, but the question is, once you've improved the restaurant there, and maybe the restaurant that comes in wouldn't, but then another restaurant comes in, ordinarily, if you're replacing a use with the same use, it does not come before, it doesn't come before.
It's just building permits, if they're not changing the footprint, right?
Yeah, it's a change of use permit or something,
Yeah, okay.
you know,
Also,
which happens all the time
yeah,
downtown.
but
They don't have to come back to the board, so. And in a way, you don't want them to have to come back to the
Right,
board,
right,
because
right, that's.
you don't wanna put that much of a burden on landlords.
So what are we, I mean, it seems like there's a couple things, if I just, we're worried about the restaurants, we're worried about the traffic impact, we're also worried about the noise, et cetera, impact off hours, meaning in the evenings and on the weekends. So there's two separate issues wrapped up in restaurants, there's probably other things that too, you know, a spa or something, I don't know, where you'd have higher usage on weekends and at night than you would than you might expect during the day. So it seems like we have two different issues. I mean, I heard one of the issues,
Is noise really an issue? Why is it noise?
well, cars coming and going.
Oh, that's traffic.
yeah, then,
How is it different from traffic?
And if it's like loud music or something, that's covered by the noise.
right, so you control noise by the noise thing, and you control
Yeah.
traffic by the
Well,
traffic
what I was
thing.
gonna say is you have to really have, you know, it has to really have sufficient screening, you know, to be able to abut a residential neighborhood. I think that's the issue that people are concerned about, is that there won't be sufficient screening on that, especially on the Maxon property, whatever it becomes.
So that would be the planning board, unless we make it clear that that's important.
I mean, the planning board can put limitations on things, for instance, on the special permit on Mercy. There's a limit to how many cars can be parked in a lot or something like that. And, you know, if they have to come up, go over that, then they're back, but, they happen to pick up on that about Mercy, because Mercy is a, you know, big project, and a lot of people come in, there's a lot of neighbor complaints. They're not gonna anticipate everything, so I think it's too much to think that the planning board is gonna think ahead about, I mean, the obvious things they'll deal with, and, I mean, so I don't, other than having the special permit procedure, I mean, I think you've gotta have in the code what you're.
So just, there seems two related issues. One is whether to permit, we're talking specifically restaurants now on Strawberry Lane, which is primarily a residential street, except for the two properties that might be changed to include restaurants, which involves having that kind of establishment in a residential neighborhood with all the implications for traffic. One of the suggestions further down, thank you, Chad, is amend the Strawberry Lane provision, so no special permit may be issued for a new use on Strawberry Lane for access or egress unless the applicant makes whatever improvements that the Board of Trustees determines are necessary to ensure and maintain safe passage over Strawberry Lane for any new or existing use. So what he had was that determination should be ours, not the planning board. But the point is that no permit can be issued without considering all of these factors. And we have talked about having perhaps a parallel route parallel to Strawberry Lane to siphon the traffic.
Behind the wall.
Yeah, and that to me makes a lot of sense. You know, that you want to protect and buffer the residential aspect of Strawberry Lane as much as possible, but permit as much of the creative use and that we had envisioned, and that the comprehensive planning group focusing on this had envisioned. So, you know, it seems that it would seem that it will all depend on the particular plan, but there should be opportunities for access onto Broadway by getting easements over other property by, you know, or we can make, or it can be that the applicant has to show a plan for appropriate access.
Yeah, but if you
So then can it be a restaurant then?
Yeah, if your requirement is You can't, I think what you're describing, it can't have access, the restaurant can't have access by its, and then however they have it, and then they've got to prove that it's, access that works, but.
I'm still a little bit, I just got to turn, I'm still a little bit concerned about there will be impacts of having a restaurant that runs until, 10 or 11 at night. It's not just noise, it's light, it's traffic, there's a lot of, there's garbage pickup, there's food delivery that happens probably during the day. So I don't know that restaurants are the only thing that actually could create additional, after hours fancy problems near a residential neighborhood.
Right, and it's certainly not the only thing is gonna create garbage or,
Exactly, right. So I'm not clear that we should be focused just on restaurants. Making sure the environmental impacts taken aggregate don't negatively impact the residential neighborhood. Isn't that what we're really concerned about? Whatever, all the impacts of whatever's, especially on that property, and less so with Abbott House, I guess, except for traffic.
I mean, you do have the general, let me read you the general special permit requirements. That would probably cover that. The planning board has to define that the location and intensity of the operations involved and are connected or conducted in connection with it, the size of the site and the location of the site with respect to streets giving access to it shall be such that it will be in harmony with the appropriate and orderly development of the district in which the site is located. Well, this is about, let's see.
That doesn't necessarily say anything about the adjacent districts.
Is that what we need to do, is add a section
Well, it's
about?
probably
sensitive area.
in here. Stuff is sort of scattered all over. Okay, it has to fit harmoniously and satisfactorily with adjacent neighborhoods. I mean, there's a lot of,
So
there's
that
a lot
sounds
of
pretty much
room
like
here.
So in general, I'm not in favor of restricting a restaurant just because it's a restaurant, but I am in favor of the idea that any development on Strawberry Lane is the responsibility of the owner to make it work. And I think our special permit law covers that.
Is there a way to put something about, almost reminding the, I guess in Chet's idea, putting it in there that for any new existing use or potential change of use, you know what I mean? Like, that way if you're saying like, yes, this person says they have 6 diners a night in a, 100,000 square foot, building, but it could change to a wing joint that would have, takeout. Is there a way to kind of, obviously it wouldn't be a legal requirement, but it would almost be a reminder for a board in 20 years that, don't forget that once it's going to be a restaurant, it's going to be a restaurant. Changing, for any new existing use, and taking into consideration potential change of use or something. I mean, it doesn't really mean anything legally, so I don't know if you put it in there, but it's almost like a reminder.
So you mean a reminder to the planning board?
Well, this would be,
To
this
be
part,
aware.
if we have Chet's piece here about this, I'm talking Strawberry Lane in particular. I think you know what I'm kind of trying to say. I don't know if there's a way to do it in law so much as there is
is there a way
preamble or
of
something.
just simply flagging the fact that, and I don't know if this is even possible, but to flag any proposal that affects, increase in, that affects Strawberry Lane, has an impact on Strawberry Lane, has to almost have a higher bar of what they have to show in terms of the
It's
impact.
really the only, I mean, there is the multifamily district to the north as well, that you probably want to, keep in mind, but I think maybe just the north and south, also reminder, the north and south ends.
Right.
They border residential areas. I mean, I know it's obvious, but, when you're considering a special permit, you have to say, well, where is this? If it's dead center at the Carfield property, it's different than if it's right up adjacent to, the multifamily units or the south part, that's the single family.
Well, we do, and there's also in the law for the North Broadway, there's additional requirements for special permits. And one about, impacts on the character of Broadway. We only will not generate noise or create other disturbance that would be detrimental to nearby residents. There's a traffic
Okay.
one. But you could add something else.
I mean, I think it's just, I think it's that. I think it's nearby residential areas, and then maybe particularly, the northern part and the southern part of the, it's obvious that that's the residential areas.
I'd like to be didactic, but actually the west side of the street is
I don't think you
residential.
identify it. You just do it general. I don't think you have to identify it. But you're talking about essentially being detrimental to nearby residents, but not just noise.
Right, yeah, and all issues. I mean, I think it's a more encompassing thing, and I think it's more just, I think what tends to happen is when, if we got a special permit for something that was passed 20 years ago, it wouldn't be top of mind, some of these things. And I think sometimes when you read the statute, sometimes it does, geez, I wonder what they're trying to get at here.
Well, special permits,
Go ahead.
I was just going to point out that special permits are often given duration and have to be reviewed. For like Mercy, special permit gets reviewed every 5 years or something.
Yeah,
That was the
they
kind of
don't
thing.
have to be. I mean, they.
No, I know,
they
but
don't
could
have to
we-
be. If you want to put limits,
Well, that's the question, is that the kind of limit that would automatically trigger for a review? But it seems like that's the only kind of review trigger I've seen.
yeah, I mean, it would, but if it years and then in year five and a half, somebody changes, ownership. I mean, so you can't get around that.
So what I was going to say is that I like the idea that Brian brought up about the extreme edges of that being a more sensitive place, but also what Mark said about screening as an important piece of all this.
Yeah, there actually is specific site plan.
And I think we do cover the fact that there's, residential neighborhoods around it. I just don't know if we need to, we just even think about if we need to strengthen that.
Yeah, no,
I'm not sure. I think right now, we would remember it, but, it's, we have an exciting project come in. Is it something that's,
It sounds like what we're looking for is something that permits the use, but will be so onerous that nobody would even dream of actually doing it.
hopefully, or heavy? Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
So, I mean,
Somebody should not be using that.
No, I think they should be the same sorts of requirements as any site plan in terms of environmental mitigations.
Environmental mitigation effect on nearby residents, absolutely.
so I was going to bring up the reality of restaurants. Most restaurants in Irvington, I mean, I live a block and a half from Main Street. It's not like we have attracted in the past a lot of very loud, big
Super
restaurants
late night.
that make a lot of noise and have a lot of traffic, and that's right on Main Street. That isn't to say that it happens, but it's not, you walk up even on an evening, if by 10:30, there's almost nobody there. If by 9:30, there's almost nobody there. It's an unusual thing to have a restaurant in Irvington that's very loud. But
Just on the screening thing,
Yeah.
the design regulations under the law, the new law of appropriate screening should be provided between the proposed use and any adjacent uses. The planning board may require additional screening around certain area, whatever is necessary to protect and enhance the visual character of Broadway and the surrounding. There's plenty of language in
That's
there,
pretty good.
plenty of authority in there for them to address almost everything that came up. But, you know, I'll add some, you know, I can broaden these, you know, the requirements about, you know, protecting residential areas. I'll find some broader language, but what about, I don't think we've decided on restaurants on Strawberry Lane.
You mean the direct access question?
Yeah, why do they have to have direct?
I mean, I do think that if we kind of put something in similar to number 10, where it's, you know,
There's real
No,
problems with the
not
language.
necessarily the language, but the general idea of it, that you have to approve it enough that, you know, you'll maintain safe passage, then
Well, no, that's in there, that's all, this language is already in our,
So not for
we
business.
already have that language in the
Except for
law.
the board of trustees.
No, it's already in the law, no special permit may be issued for use using Strawberry Lane for access or egress unless the applicant makes whatever improvements are necessary to ensure and maintain safe passage over Strawberry Lane.
That's without the suggested addition, that's probably fine.
But are you saying if those improvements are made, you're okay with the restaurant?
I mean, I think it's gonna be so case dependent.
I think it's so unlikely.
That's the other thing, it's so unlikely.
I agree.
If I was opening a restaurant, that would probably
Restaurants
be
have
less.
such a small margin of,
Updating Strawberry Lane to open a restaurant. If
No,
I had
yeah.
a business complex or something else, or since it's something that had some guaranteed revenue for the property.
So I almost think it's, we're talking about something that is such a small.
So let's not lose the forest for the trees and let's move on.
yeah, so
Well, the issue with 10, it just.
We're not up to 10,
no,
we're
we're
up to
not
4.
there, okay?
So we're still on 3, we're still on 3.
Okay.
Let's move from 2 and 3
Okay,
on to
so,
4.
so we're just leaving the whole restaurant thing alone. Okay.
Well, given if you do add some language where you think it's appropriate to make it strict.
Protect the surrounding neighborhood.
Yes.
Right, okay. Okay, number 4.
Well, we said no size limit, right?
Yeah. Number 4, Strawberry Lane, reduce the maximum capacity of senior living facilities from 150. It's not necessarily, it can't be greater than 150, but there's all kinds of other things. There are all kinds of other things that mean that on that particular property, it can't be bigger than, I think under our calculations, on the Axon site, it was something like 60 or 70 or something, I forget, you know, but it, so I don't think that's necessary, but you could, there are a couple of really big properties there. The
Well, the Abbott House.
property, or the Abbott House property,
It's a couple of lots.
that could probably, if you use the numbers we have, go much higher than 150, but this says your limit's 150.
So I'm good with leaving
I
that.
think it's still okay.
Okay. Strawberry Lane, on traffic impacts, there can only be a negligible.
I like the changes you made that were very specific and had measurements. That, I mean, that wasn't in the original draft, and it was in the more recent draft.
Right.
Rather
Yeah,
than-
traffic.
Yeah, we define what's unmitigated significant adverse impacts, but this was a response to that, they wanted to make it more increase. I mean, of course, the issue with that is, any use is gonna be an increase in traffic, any use
And
of
what's
those
negligible
properties
is-
is
Oh, yeah, one person's negligible is another person's.
So the measurable
I think
ones
to me, having an actual standard is much better.
Village should take ownership of Strawberry Lane.
That's a non-starter.
Brian, I don't think
Okay.
that's gonna happen.
Chet Kerr
Check back.
suggested defining offices in research design. I know they're not defined in here, they're not defined elsewhere in our code, and I hesitate. There's a lot of, I mean, restaurants aren't defined, there's lots of uses that aren't defined. And I think the problem with defining it, even if we defined it for this, is I don't wanna heard any existing laws that can come up. Not unusual that those are undefined terms and codes.
Okay, let's leave it.
All right, Shem also suggested that the amendment should direct the planning board that modification to stone wall should not be permitted unless absolutely necessary. Now, just so you know, there's a couple of, and you can decide whether you think it's enough. In the draft law, there's a section that says that existing stone walls shall be maintained to the greatest extent practicable, which of course is a little bit different than that. And then our,
Then we have stone.
in our stone wall, in this stone wall law, I think it's part of, I think it's sidewalks law, there's a section on stone walls, which is 184-3. And if there's conditions for reviewing proposed removals or modifications of stone walls, because they can be removed. Removal or modification of stone walls may be granted under the following circumstances: if the stone walls are weakened by age, storm, fire, such that they pose a safety hazard. If the stone walls substantially interfere with the permitted use of the property, such that the denial of the permit would cause undue hardship to the landowner as determined by the planning board. Okay, so those are the standards we have now. This, of course, would be a higher standard unless absolutely
That
necessary.
undue hardship would be after the fact. It wouldn't be something that would be argued during a site plan approval process, right?
Yeah, and it says, yeah, I think it would. It said unless you remove this part of the wall, it'll be an undue hardship, and I'm not gonna be able to use the property the way I wanna use it.
Oh, so it could be.
And then the language that we've got is existing stone wall shall be maintained to the greatest extent practical. I don't know if you wanna strengthen that.
I think that's weak.
I think a little strengthening of that
Yeah.
would be advisable. I mean,
I unless absolutely necessary is very protective, but you've just described situations where you thought to improve, Strawberry Lane, somebody might have to move this stone wall.
Right.
That's not absolutely necessary, but.
I'm less concerned about the stone wall parallel to Strawberry Lane. I'm more concerned about the stone walls parallel to Broadway. To me, those are the kind of the historical look and feel of the district, of that corridor. I think there should be an unusually high bar to make changes to that.
I'm certainly in favor of a useful, strong protection of the walls, but
This is pretty interesting, actually. The way it reads is that the planning board has to be satisfied that the proposed use will not have a significant visual impact on the character of Broadway, including but not limited to the following. Existing stone walls should be maintained to the greatest extent practical. So it is a little bit more protected. That language, I would say, would not apply to the Strawberry Lane stone wall, but you've got your general stone wall language.
But how does that work with the requirements that certain uses have to have direct access to Broadway?
Right.
So you're saying you need to punch through the stone walls.
Right. And necessary? Well, it depends. It's absolutely necessary if you want that use, but it's not absolutely necessary.
Right, that's why I don't like that standard,
Yeah.
because it depends on which end are you applying it from.
So if you punched through the Broadway stone wall, because without that, you can't practically have a restaurant or something there, then the way it's written now, that would probably be permitted by the planning board. because it's necessary
Shall be maintained.
and practical.
I like that better.
I mean, certainly, when, I don't know what year the code had a whole chapter on stone walls, it's probably in codes to have a chapter on stone walls.
It was fairly new. It was, there was something in '84, but it was, says amended in its entirety in 2003.
So here's a separate,
So fairly recent.
So it is considered by, I think, if you ask people in town if those walls are important to the character, people would say absolutely. So,
so, but we're making as Lori points out, that there's an obvious contradiction, because we're saying that some of those properties have to, they need to have access. Well, we don't actually, it depends how it's written, is it Broadway access, or is this access not via Strawberry Lane?
Yeah.
Well, but with easements, you can get anything without having to knock another hole in the wall. So is that what we're trying?
Wait a minute, so let's say you got the Maxon property, you don't want them to come out Strawberry, what are they supposed to do? Get an easement all the way through the Moon property?
Garfield, or whatever
Go
that.
through-
Well, then Terrafiello is gonna still come out on Broadway.
yeah,
Right, but it's
there's
existing.
already a hole there. There's already a driveway. You don't have to make a new hole in the wall. So there is a way to do it without,
But that's something that if Garfield, we say Garfield, but it's that property,
Yeah.
whoever the current owner is, they could decide, we don't want anything to do with easements, period. Because you can't force it.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say that,
Yeah.
you can't legislate that someone
no, they
work
could say
cooperatively
no.
with their neighbor.
No.
Oh, was that easy? Yeah, it was that easy.
I was gonna throw one other thing out, Connie, that you might be interested in, that is, in the case of stone walls, is it something, because of the historic importance and the feel of it to the community, is that something that the trustees should be involved in, rather than just leaving it as a planning board process? In other
Interesting.
words, do we have to approve stone wall modification?
Interesting thought.
I mean, I do think that we're talking pretty much only about the Maxon property.
Never wanting to.
So, I think that's the
So if
issue.
you can't break through.
So every other
if-
one on Broadway has access to
Well,
Broadway, or Sunnyside.
There's already a.
Evan House, right?
Let's not gonna ever get access.
I don't think that'd be very tough. I mean, that'd be easement city and they'd be the mayor, but I don't know how that would work.
So if,
You're gonna run out your driveway as access.
Yeah, there you go.
if
Right through Riverview instead.
if you can't, if you can't have
Tunnel.
access through the wall onto Strawberry Lane, and you can't destroy the wall on Broadway, the only alternative is to go and try to find an easement. So, I don't know.
We had also talked about maybe moving the walls, like not necessarily
Yeah.
destroying them, but just.
Moving them back.
Or enhancing them, or, using.
That would probably be something that the village government would be involved in, not the planning board, because the Route 9 corridor monies or something like that. Right, so I don't,
Oh,
I'm not sure, I think that's a good point, I'm not sure how that relates to.
So for what it's worth, Mark, on the current approval or not for stone walls is done by the planning board.
I mean, these ones, things where, if they took the existing wall and they curved it or something,
yeah, they're, I
that's
think
why they
there
didn't
are.
destroy it, but they made an opening, it's looking,
It could be
it
nice,
could be
it could be
nice.
nice.
So it's not, to me, it's just really gotta have, it's just gotta be well done, as opposed to just put a hole.
Is there is there a way to strengthen it without saying unless absolutely necessary, or?
You know what, I'll
Yeah.
see if there's language in between those 16. Yeah, I just can't think of it now,
Language in
but,
between.
yeah.
So, we have historic properties that have to be reviewed for modification, that they haven't changed the character of the property. That's been going to the ARB, right?
If it's a historical building.
And, I guess for every application, it has to fit with the what's the language about the character, must meet the, fit with the character of that neighborhood.
I'm sorry, Tony.
No, I was trying to answer.
Because it all sticks in my head and the next day.
It's gone, right, yeah. Good, taking notes, very good.
Just like Ambassador Taylor.
Yes, yes. No, I was just saying that requirement that, for every application, it has to fit the character of the neighborhood. It gets referred to the ARB for that.
But we talked about some of the subtleties.
It's not that it's totally different for a historic property that's in the historic district. Everywhere, you have to fit in with the character of the neighborhood. That's a,
Yeah,
right. So Mark was just bringing that up.
but it doesn't go, what are you talking about? But it goes to the ARB for historic?
Oh,
You mean
yes.
any property?
Yes, any property, any property, any property.
Okay?
So I guess
So
I
we're
would
gonna look for intermediate language.
just throw one thing out, and then I'll shut up. And that's my concern, that is it possible that the planning board may agree to something that actually doesn't fit in with the historical nature of the walls?
Possible, sure.
Right, and do we, that's what I'm trying to get at is, are they gonna be, how do we ensure that they're gonna be sensitive to that as a defining characteristic?
I point out to you that the current, that they're currently responsible for that.
We can't take away
And,
I mean,
And the ARB.
and we appoint them.
I mean, we can.
yeah,
So take over.
I mean, it happens, Mark. I mean, we saw it happen with the train station. In fact, it didn't happen because they ended up not making the changes, but where the I guess it was the ARB was opposed to the changes and the planning board was okay with it. It was about changing the roof line. It ended up not happening. Yeah, so it happens sometimes. I mean, I would guess what you.
Board that isn't as responsive to some of these issues as this board is.
Right.
Us, you mean, us.
Yes.
I mean, I think if you had a board that you thought was really being, disrespectful of the law, you just say sorry, and you're out and you appoint new people.
All right.
Okay, I guess I'm just being overly protective. Let's see what
Yeah,
the
but it
language
hasn't,
you
I don't
come up
think it's
with.
been an issue.
No, because no one's really tried to do it yet.
I think the next one we can agree on is okay.
8?
Because lot 5 has access to Sunnyside B and B.
9.
9. The B and B use should be amended on lots with direct access to Broadway and or East Sunnyside Lane. Seems fine.
That makes good sense.
That's a good one.
Amend Strawberry Lane provision as follows. No special permit may be issued for a new use on Strawberry Lane for access or egress unless the applicant makes whatever improvements that determines, that's new
That's his
language,
addition, right?
are necessary to ensure and maintain safe passage over Strawberry Lane for any new or existing use. I'm not sure whether for any new or existing uses, because no special permit may be issued for a new use on Broadway. I think that language for any new or existing uses.
But this means that the board, it's what we were just talking about, that the Board of Trustees should make these decisions.
Yeah, but the other issue is whether the Board of Trustees should decide what would.
I thought the wall was a narrow issue of historical, value, whereas this one seems purely directly in the planning board's bailiwick.
This is
They're the
sort of
one that has
stuff
all
This is what
they do all the time. I don't see why.
and they have the
We-
traffic people, and,
Exactly.
yeah.
And they know that, we know, we're telling them that Strawberry Lane's an important road.
They'll hear from
Okay. Then Maxon suggested amending the definition of senior living facility, changing a couple words, and that's correct, that's a good change, and it's certainly what the intention was. Maxon suggested permitting consulates and embassies, and spas as permitted uses.
My only downside with consulates and embassies is you've lost tax revenue.
You've lost tax revenue, you've lost control, you've lost zoning control over it. Once it's another country, it's another country, you don't have any.
Well, they should solve alternate passports, I guess.
Yeah.
Is there a way to control that if they wanted to buy it, or is that like, can they?
I don't think.
I don't think you can.
No, I
Just-
can
just not-
anyway,
we're
but
just
you
not
don't wanna
advertising.
encourage it, yeah.
So,
That's playing out, to me,
It's not our vision.
it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if we have it or not, they can still do it, but we'd rather not
Yeah.
plant
Yeah.
the seed.
And I think spas, we and those might include spas, you know, I don't know if you understand the word spa, because then you actually, I think probably would have pretty serious traffic issues.
So we just move on.
I don't think it wasn't something that the group, the comprehensive plan group
Yeah.
was talking about, so.
So there's no reason to add it now.
Right.
Maxon suggested boutique hotels and B&Bs should not require direct access to Broadway. It should be encouraged to be directly to Broadway or closer to Broadway, Buckspot, or Wayne.
This is the same discussion we've had. I don't know that, you know, they still require major improvements to some sections of Strawberry Lane for that to go forward. What are we saying?
Right now, we're saying B and Bs and boutique hotels have to be directly on Broadway. That's the way it's currently written. Change that.
And if we have the same, if we put in the same thing, that you have to improve Strawberry Lane, it has the same control in that it would be
Prohibitively expensive than
prohibited,
Korea.
right? So why would anybody do it?
So that doesn't make sense.
Well, I think we're almost arguing the opposite now, like also with the restaurants, like, you know, do we have to limit it? We're almost backpedaling on that.
We're saying we don't limit it as long as they're doing something to enhance Strawberry Lane for
Well,
the impacts.
For what it's worth, our current law on B&Bs is that they can only be
Yeah.
on Broadway and Main Street.
So I think we just leave it that way for now.
Yeah.
We're not changing it and opening a new, you know.
Well, what about allowing them with access to Strawberry Lane? In other words, it seems that it's a, you know, it's a major thoroughfare.
But I think now,
Strawberry Lane is a
No,
major?
no, did I say?
Yes.
I meant
Oh,
Sunnyside.
Sunnyside.
Sorry.
I was like, what is he talking
What am I
about?
talking about? I meant Sunnyside, just like we were talking before, that, you know, how as long as they had access to either Broadway or Sunnyside.
Yeah, well, I guess we already agreed that B&Bs
Go to Sunnyside Lane.
should be on East Sunnyside, and I guess boutique hotels, or something?
Could be.
There was already a hotel on Sunnyside,
Right.
on the other side.
Yeah, Tarrytown Park.
Right.
Yeah, so maybe B and Bs and boutique hotels or East Sunnyside Lane up to number 9.
Yeah.
But I think we leave this alone, the Strawberry Lane piece.
All right, and then, oh yeah, on some of the dimensional requirements we had, it had to be 250 feet from Broadway, and then that the height had to be could only be 2 stories, between 250 and 300 feet. So and we said unless it would serve an important public interest, and they suggest more specific language that would be, it's anticipated that strict compliance with every dimensional standard may not always be practical or necessary to meet the purposes of this chapter. In such cases, the Board of Trustees is authorized to modify the dimensional standards set forth to the extent necessary and appropriate to accommodate existing limitations, provided that the Board of Trustees makes all of the following findings. One, that the modification will accommodate existing site constraints or development limitations. Two, the modification does not create an undue adverse effect on abutting properties. The modification does not conflict with the intent of the standard being modified, and the modification allows for an improvement that will add to the overall vitality of the Broadway mixed-use district and advance the purposes of this chapter. You know what, I just had, in reading this, I just had the thought, that's sort of the determination that the zoning board is supposed to make if you want an area variance. And essentially what they would be seeking is area variances, right, the setbacks.
Or setback variance.
So do you want the Board of Trustees doing that?
Well, we already talked about making a setback allowance, right?
No, but this is, yeah, what, let me see.
What's
Let
the
me read
existing
the
one?
language.
Right.
Yeah.
Taking away the zoning board's
Yeah, but,
decision making?
yeah, it's a little, yeah, it's a, right. Okay. On the 250 feet of Broadway, where, however, the Board of Trustees in its sole discretion determines that construction closer to Broadway would serve an important public interest and would be consistent with the 2018 comprehensive plan update, it may waive this 250-foot requirement. So it's a little different, but it is giving you the authority to vary it instead of, going to the zoning board and having to make this show. So I mean, you always have that option of going to the zoning board.
Here's my issue, if I may. My issue is that this is a new zoning area, zoning district, and there's no history of activity, and there will be limited activity. I mean, there's only a handful of properties in it, so it's not like existing decisions rendered by the zoning board about setbacks and stuff necessarily are applicable to this district. It's unique. So, when you're talking about setbacks in residential districts of certain types, whatever the zoning board has a whole history of what kind
Yeah,
of.
but I know they often look at what they did in other cases, but their standards are A, is it going to affect the character of the neighborhood? B, is it going to cause environmental property? C, is the environmental issues? C, is it the minimum necessary? D, is there another way to get around it? So they have their standards. Sometimes they'll look at what they've done otherwise, but that shouldn't.
Well, it's often argued in the planning board that it sets a precedence.
Well,
Not the
I know
planning
they
board,
argue
but
it,
it's-
but those aren't, that's not even, precedents aren't even one of the. I mean, you do want to be consistent, I mean, because if somebody goes to court, they'll see, sue what you're doing, saying you're being arbitrary, because in other cases you do this, so it's not irrelevant.
Well, how do we communicate to the ZBA in some sense of the law that the intent of, I'm not saying they would arbitrarily just break the setback because someone came in, but we had a fairly specific set of reasons why we wanted the setback the way it's been defined. So what conditions?
Yeah, well, you know what, Mark, it's true of every single requirement in here. Remember, any provision in the code, you can go to the zoning board for. And if it relates to an area requirement, any sort of, bulk requirement, they've got the, their standards. And if it's a different use, that's standard. So,
So are you arguing that we don't need to be involved, or are you saying?
No, I mean, I didn't think that was a bad provision, where the board of trustees determines a
So what,
but what
so
they're
what is this
suggesting.
suggestion, how does that really change from what's existing there?
Well, and maybe the standard's a little bit less, because we had said it has to serve an important public interest. And some of the, and maybe it would be necessary for the use that they wanted. It wouldn't adversely affect abutting properties. It doesn't conflict with the intent of the standard being modified. And, you know, it would be an overall good improvement, but it doesn't serve an important public interest.
Could we change
Yeah, I mean,
the
that's-
one word to take the word important? So that's a lower standard, like there's some kind of public interest as opposed to an important public interest? Is that even is there even a difference?
I don't see what public interest there is. It's a commercial development. What, you know,
Maybe that whole concept is no longer applicable since we're changing the zoning to allow other uses.
Except that they're, you know, giving it, you know, more,
Yeah, maybe,
you know, affordable housing or maintaining historical buildings or, I think that those
okay, so those would be
public interests.
But there's a whole slew of arguments. that have
Yeah,
nothing to
that's
do
what
with
they-
that.
Right,
That's
absolutely.
what that says there.
Absolutely,
You can
yeah.
read the whole
I mean,
paragraph.
I'm not sure if the word important means, you know, changes, you know.
What about a compelling public interest?
Is that a high?
I think that sounds like a higher standard.
Significant.
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 Important, significant. I mean,
But
I
again,
do like the
but
public.
it is in the sole discretion of the board of trustees, so, you know, they could probably have to be important or significant anyway.
I guess I just find that there's a lot of things that interest element, I mean, that's very little.
Right.
So,
As a board would be approving?
So, but-
yes, there's arguments you can make because of something that they want to do with the facility, that they could come in and make an argument, they need to move the building forward this much or whatever, and it's not really a compelling or whatever they.
It doesn't serve the public interest, but it's important for their
But the
development.
setback is what serves the public interest. That's why the comprehensive plan is wanting to restore that setback. So when you do something that's gonna be against that, it's gotta still be in the public interest. It can't just be for the convenience of a,
I mean, public interest is a fairly
that
broad,
it's going against.
You can't violate the public interest even with commercial development that we're permitting, right? You can't say, well, you know, you build what you will, we don't care.
No, but I think what, my reading of what Larry was saying is just that, you know, you don't want to have a bunch of things that undermine, the underlying public interest was the setback to begin with.
but Brian brings up a good point, you know, if it has to do with affordable,
Right, so that's a public interest that can
It's a
override the other
significant
public
event,
interest.
that's right.
Right.
So
But that's why we
That's
get
why,
to
that's
keep
why we
public
put
interest
that
in.
provision in there.
so,
I mean, I don't know if we're caught up on the word important versus public
Well,
interest.
significant.
Versus.
Yeah.
so it could go with,
I don't think those
I
are
don't think it makes a
three
big difference, but
Right, I know.
whether it's significant or
Circle the one you want to use.
And you know, I think too, if it's going 1 foot into it, it's probably less
Like
significant
public
if it
interest?
goes 100 feet into it or whatever, so.
So, but
because I was trying to think what example there would be, that's why I appreciated your comment, like, what might this be that would fit this? You know, you have this old, you have this language and then it doesn't fit
That's what we
anything.
were talking about when we put that in the first one.
This thing,
Talking about affordable housing.
it seems to me that these 4 points are the kinds of things that we might talk about in order to find out what's significantly impacting the public interest or not. If there's some mitigating, not mitigating, but there's some analysis you do. So these would certainly fall under that, wouldn't they? I mean, it seems like,
well, I wouldn't think that you would do it if it wasn't necessary to accommodate whatever their development is.
number one.
You wouldn't do it if it would have an undue adverse effect, conflict with the intent of the standard being modified, well, it would.
Yeah.
And then that it would allow for an improvement that would, I think those are all things that we take into account. But the thing is, you could have those things, all of these could be met without serving an important public.
But that's the question. I mean, it's like,
And
they're
Larry
not
makes a good
sufficient
point.
criteria, but they're criteria that might be talked about.
Yeah.
So, but we wouldn't.
We don't want to
It doesn't need to be in there.
And I don't think we don't want to say we don't want to have any kind of public interest, we're just going to do it strictly for the commercial interest. I think is the real takeaway.
So you're saying, you know, think we need to add this,
Correct.
I agree.
Right, I think we don't want to be limited.
because it's already, in a sense, those things are already gonna be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I don't think you need.
You don't have to re-say it.
And we don't want to be imply that we're limited to only those 4 criteria.
Right.
Okay.
We might, right, a particular project, we may decide there's another issue that we need to consider.
Okay, then, Maxon's suggestion was that the FAR be increased to 0.4, 140. I think it's now 30 now. I think didn't we increase it from 25 to 30 minutes?
And then, that's just what the,
That's an extra cost.
No, yeah, but that's a. But although it might be. Oh, okay. What, I guess it's helpful. I mean, you can tell that on that map, well, you know what? Dan and 16, let them make the pitch if you want to hear why they're there. I think the more significant thing is that, we said that in computing FAR, you could exclude, existing historical structures, but there was a cap,
Right,
and I think
and the cap was what, point?
0.1. So, so that the FAR permitted was 0.30, but you could
Go up to point 4,
0.40.
but you couldn't go beyond.
And so I think they're trying to make the argument that it should be,
0.4 plus.
Starting whatever.
right,
But not
yeah,
counting.
right. Or even if you took the,
0.6,
or even if you took, let's say even if you took the 0.3 and you left it at 0.3, because I think the board talked a lot about that, and you looked at the pictures from Susan and whatever, and that was the number you were comfortable with. But let's say to be able to build what they could build otherwise, and then, keep what building they have, it would need to be more than 0.1, more than a 0.1 bonus. I did actually, if you look at their drawing, I did do a calculation on what the FAR would have to be for them, to also include that, the existing building, it would have to go up, Chrissy? It would have to be 0.45. So then the cap would go from, then the cap would be 30, and then instead of a bonus of 0.10, it would have to be 0.15. I'm a little uncomfortable about not putting on a cap at all, because you could have like a really big, like Abbott House is quite a big building. And then if they could have that plus
Right.
whatever the other FAR is, it could be pretty big. I mean, maybe the cap of point.
Right, so what was our reasoning? Do we remember our reasoning in arriving at 0.4 as the cap as a, in terms of, like I know that
It
we
was a
wanted to
bonus of
encourage.
0.1.
Right. We wanted to give a bonus to encourage the use of existing. Why did we choose 0.1 as opposed to 0.5 or 1.4?
Then what we had used on Marco, for the,
Denardo
for
property.
the Bernardo
So there was precedent for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was what we used there. I don't think it was even as high.
We were, actually, it was coverage that we were focused on, over on the T property.
Yeah, because there wasn't that bad, yeah.
So one of the issues that I have is that and you pointed this out, Marion, it's the disparity. For instance, it kind of, for want of a better word, ignoring or undersizing the impact of those 3 historic, quote-unquote, historic buildings on the Carpella property. I have no problem that if those sort of don't count at all or count minimally,
Yeah, but it's also
because
not
it's a large property and they're not that big.
Right.
But as you point out, Abbott House is the other side of the coin, which is they have a lot of existing buildings, and whether or not we declare them historic, you know, maybe.
You might well, you know.
Like a real,
You can build out the entire piece of property.
right, exactly, and you can have a
but
huge
just-
amount of.
But you still have limits on coverage though, so if you have limits on coverage, that you don't have bonuses for, that are applicable to the historic structure.
Yeah, no, there's a bonus for that, I
But
think
if you
that's
ca-
point one.
But if you cap the bonus on the coverage, but you leave the FAR uncapped, maybe you still have more of an incentive to preserve a historic structure. In other words, what I'm,
Say that again.
so, if you're capping the FAR the way we have it proposed right now, you run the risk of making it less attractive to preserve an historic structure. But the concern is if you keep it uncapped, that you could quote-unquote develop the entire lot, but you can't develop the entire lot because you have coverage limits. So, to leave floor area ratio uncapped while addressing something more solid on the coverage. Because what difference does it make to you if, you know, the stories are built out to the maximum, as long as the coverage isn't exceedingly large?
So what would happen
And all
with
the
this
screening
particular
is in
drawing?
place and all
All
the-
in the name of trying to preserve, that's my point.
So with this particular drawing, where it's now as it is going over our .4
If this one would,
FAR, but if we left an uncapped FAR,
it would be point.
would this fit, would
it's
this
.45.
fit within the coverage?
Well, actually, this would need, I did the calculation, and this would need an FAR of .45.
Right,
Right, but
Okay.
the coverage, is this coverage within,
but if we allowed an uncapped FAR with
You know what?
coverage as the backup to maintain sizes.
Maybe we should have them explain it. Unfortunately, we got this at the last minute, and I'm sure nobody had a chance to read it. I would have,
Look
because
at
I
it,
have nobody
that's
else.
why I'm asking these questions,
No, I
because
know.
it's still.
It's up to you, Brian. whether you
Yeah,
want
I'd be happy to, I think it might move this part along, so.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to mention one thing, just listening to us talking here. We don't have in a sense, we don't have I guess from describing it, I wouldn't necessarily call it an uncapped FAR. What we're saying is that we still have a fixed 3 or 3.5 FAR for new construction. It's just that we're saying that existing buildings don't
Right.
contribute to FAR.
Correct.
They contribute to coverage, but not to FAR. That's a different statement that maybe it amounts to the same thing, but when you say you have uncapped FAR, it sounds a little bit like, you know, it's a wild party going on. You know what I'm saying?
but
It's more
the
mass.
size of the massing is related to
There's
the
more
size of the
mass.
existing
Yeah.
building. The bigger the existing building, the larger the overall massing's gonna be. So, because there's no cap. I don't mean that you can build out to the, you
No,
know,
no, but I'm just saying that the cap, okay, it's just semantics.
So,
Sure. But I also think that the one last piece is that, you know, I think that FAR also allowed us not to worry about the maximum capacity of like senior living facilities, right? So if you had, you know, more FAR, then you potentially have a bigger mass of, you know, or that kind of further use of like assisted living facility or something, right?
you would, yeah, I mean, so if this were all, this could create a bigger assisted living facility, and then you could have more units. I mean, you're still not gonna get up to the 150.
I was gonna say, but you still have the overriding cap
Yeah.
of the unit, a number of units.
Yeah.
So, not that this property necessarily could support that, but
I mean, the worst case is no different than if they just tear down historic structures. I mean, what's the value they're getting? They're getting that it's not counting against them, right? It's, in our current, the way it's written right now, they get a .1. Right, .1.
Yeah, which can be significant. I mean, it certainly would be for the Carafiello property. I mean, it's an incentive for them to keep them up.
it's not significant enough to be compelling to preserve this particular building.
Well, I guess not, yeah. I mean,
Because they
that's
would
for them,
exceed it.
which is
the
Well, no,
benefits.
but I mean, by the numbers, they would exceed it.
Right, shall we hear?
Yeah, let's complete, there we go.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the
Tell us
opportunity.
what you're talking
For the
about.
record, Taylor Hahn, Tony Spader, we appreciate the opportunity to provide this. And again, this material was a two-page submission sort of to reflect on some of the prior comments. We previously started with market conditions to sort of identify, as the board's aware, we had a previous assisted living developer that looked at the Maxon property particularly, and the FAR had been one of their principal concerns. So what we were identifying with these two drawings, the first drawing is a massing study. You're all familiar with North Broadway. The proposed massing would actually be in front of the building, so it would really, what we were trying to show is that whether you change the FAR for this building to be inclusive of the 8,000 or so square feet of the existing mansion building, it wouldn't have any real perceivable impact to the development of the site. And we appreciate the village administrator's comments this evening with respect to the cap. You have a number of other control mechanisms that are in this district, whether it's lot coverage or otherwise. But the second sheet that we provided was just to sort of give it an additional reference, sort of as the visual impact that would relate. Of course, the topography for these properties is what really plays the major role in the overall aesthetics from Broadway and how visually it would be impacted. So from our prior work session, we presented, and Dave Smith and Susan Jane shall put some visuals up on the board to show essentially what you could or couldn't see because of topography and what limited screening could actually do to sort of limit those impacts. So why the image looks familiar is it's you see the same drawing, and that's sort of the point of what we're referencing here. We certainly understand the board's concern that an unfettered or uncontrolled FAR could have certain imperceived. We're not saying that, and we actually incorporated in that letter, I realized, in parentheses, and it was provided tonight, so I'm glad we're providing the opportunity this evening to clarify. But all that Maxon is really suggesting is that because there are certain properties, such as the Maxon property, similar to how not everything fits on or works on each of these sites, and this is very limited. There are only 6 properties involved in the overall redevelopment here. So we're not saying that the Abbott House should qualify as, if it were to qualify as a building of local historic significance, that all of that would count towards the FAR. We're saying that if there is a building on any of these lots, since there are only 6 of them, that you would be credited up to at least 0.05 of additional FAR. So if the board saw fit of capping that at 0.45, those are based on market conditions. That's what we've identified for assisted living facilities. So it's a combination of our prior submissions about 0.45 being similar conditions on similar assisted living facility developments.
Wait. You said a bonus of 0.05.
So in addition to the one.
A bonus of
Right, so the one is provided so the current code is 0.3 FAR. And if you maintain a building of local historic significance,
You can
it's
go up to
raised
0.4. Right.
And so based on the market conditions for the development of this property and to incentivize maintaining the building, it really, 0.45, as you mentioned, is the number, or sort of the magic number to make this workable, but it also happens to be a function of our site lends itself to having a building that would actually be about 0.05 additional FAR in addition. So you have a cap right now today at 0.4, and if we were to sort of dial it down to, it'd be no more than 0.45 if you maintain a historic building. So even if you had a 50,000 square foot Abbott House.
Why, this to have a building this size? What if it were smaller, if it didn't have this? You see what I mean? You're starting out assuming 0.4 when the board said that they wanted an FAR of 0.3.
Completely agree. And all we're identifying is that based on, while we're looking at it visually, we're trying to represent that there would be really no change aesthetically to what you'd see from Broadway, which is a principal consideration of why why the board is considering additional controls for the FAR, for the lot coverage, for the building height, for the setbacks, all inclusive in that standard. But from the market conditions, we're identifying that 0.4 is not sufficient. And ultimately, it really would only have, and would also not, as the village administrator mentioned, wouldn't have a lot of incentive to maintain the historic buildings. So there's a combination of factors, which is why it's, I guess, been spread out over 3 submissions, sort of targeting initially what we were looking at to help sort of, or propose to increase the FAR, and then further justify, by maintaining these buildings that there may be an opportunity for at least a little bit more limited bonus. So essentially, we're identifying it as a 0.15 bonus over the 0.1 that's currently in the code.
So this second sheet, though, is a 0.4.
Yeah, it's so, both sheets are labeled or entitled, .4 FAR, although I think, they're both labeled .4. The original, the massing study on sheet 1 does show, if you maintain the existing, mansion building behind, the proposed massing. And of course, this is just a massing study, this is not,
The comment says it excludes the existing mansion building on the first sheet.
correct, and that shown could achieve
I
the
just
design.
Just want to be sure that Janice was clear.
So
It
what?
sounded contradictory to what you were saying. I don't know.
No,
She's on the second sheet says .4 as far as our design, we're showing on our sheet a .4 design, but that's a .4 FAR exclude, you're absolutely right, Mark, excluding the FAR from the mansion house,
New construction.
new construction.
so this is not this.
I mean, I see where we're both, all right, so each sheet is showing a .4 new construction with excluding the existing, so it's maintaining the massive mansion building, it's the same,
Okay.
same
So
proposal.
this is the .45 because the building is 0.5.
Right.
0.05.
105, yep, exactly. And just one point on the waiver, I know that we were not speaking about this particular issue, we weren't necessarily providing those standards. We were seeking, of course, some clarity of the somewhat ambiguous nature of serving an important public interest. We were just identifying that rather than narrowly tailoring those two waiver provisions to two specific criteria in the law, that generalized provision be applicable universally throughout your North Broadway mixed-use district, so that it would allow for the board to have that same standard of, that interpretability of any of the standards proposed, because that would allow for, a lot of the conversation in prior meetings was maintaining aesthetics, the walls, all these traffic, all these components could play into pretty much any of these standards. So if you're getting a better building design, because it's allowed certain modifications, that this board might be able to help tailor that before it goes to the planning board, and that's what we were saying. So we were saying that the waiver provision not necessarily needed standards or criteria. Of course, we recommended that, but it's more that it be universally or generally applicable to any, that this board have its ability to modify any of those standards that are contained therein. And that was more an additional sort of piece of that, rather than just on two specific standards that might be universally applied to any of the standards.
Well, that sounds like it's a ZBA issue. Unless I'm missing something.
And we proposed that based on a new zoning code that's proposed for a new zoning district similar to this, where it's adaptively reusing or trying to repurpose down a new zoning district that's being developed. It gives its legislative body, in that case a town board, the ability to make those determinations early, because it allows, again, it gives some level of flexibility in not requiring every project to go before the zoning board of appeals, which can oftentimes kill a project before it even starts. Hope I sufficiently confused all of you. And I'm doing my best Dave Smith impression, so we appreciate your consideration. Of course.
It's a tough balancing act, because,
Exactly, that's the
But
word,
that's-
balance.
right, but I mean,
But I think giving us leeway to balance so that we can take account of all of the considerations of a particular property, whether the size of the historic building, the size of the lot, the particular plan makes sense.
I mean, obviously, preserving, incentives to preserve historic buildings are high on this board's list, and they're certainly on mine. If this helps that, and there's still the controls that Larry's bringing up, then
look,
maybe
I don't know what the numbers are, that's
yeah,
unfortunate,
I don't know
because,
if Mary Ann is doing the math here.
right, because effectively, you're .1 apart on the FAR standard here, right?
Yeah, I know.
So-
It's just
so-
comparing apples and oranges, it's too hard to, yeah.
Right, so that's the ultimate question. You sat down and pushed yourself from 0.25 to 0.3, and now essentially you're asking for the base number, you're being asked for the base number to be 0.4, and then still add on for the historic structure, which is fine. The historic part, I don't think there's too much debate about,
No, but, yeah.
but the underlying
Except for
FAR.
the house.
Well, no, I'm saying on this particular property, but I think there were
I
overriding
think you could
limits.
put a cap, and maybe the cap just has to be bigger.
Right, we were suggesting that no more than 0.05 for any existing historic building, so
What do you mean
Yeah.
by .05?
No,
That's
no,
assuming
but that's
this is
the- that-
.40,
because
the
that's
board
the-
wants to go with .30.
I know,
If the
but then
board
they
wants-
won't get to where they want to go, because
Well,
this
they-
is only .05.
Right.
The existing structure is only .05. I'm going by their calculations, I assume they're correct, so
Yeah, this isn't.
by offering more of a bonus for the historic structure doesn't help.
We're not doing anything on that. That's not really part of the issue. It's really just changing the FAR to be .4.
Right.
And the historic structure piece works because it's only .5. You guys are there 4.5.
So I mean,
Wait, I guess I don't understand. If you had, let's say your FAR was .3, but you want an incentive for them to keep the existing building.
which is .05.
Well, then why isn't it covered? I'm so,
Because they, I think the opening line that Taylor mentioned is that the size of this structure at .3 is not big enough to be economically viable.
Yeah.
That's where our
well,
disagreement is. Well, no, but that's where we are.
it's not, okay.
That's where we are.
It's not big enough for an
That's right.
assisted
So-
living facility.
Correct.
That's the topic that we have explored with our planning consultant significantly, and so here we are. I mean, so either,
Okay, so what about if you take, okay, this is gonna sound, double. If you give additional benefits for us, affordable units, so that, part of their enlargement to meet market needs is also serving a benefit to the greater community.
And there's public interest.
that
I
gets to
agree,
that.
I like that a lot. So to,
You go to
that-
0.5 and then they get to the.
I don't know, I'm just saying, it's a path. You can talk the numbers afterwards, but maybe that's the path for, to focus, because we're talking about other types of facilities may work within that 3 or 3.5, 0.35 or 0.3, depending what number, if you're in the historical building. But if it's specifically senior assisted living or whatever you call that class of unit, then you put another variable in there that's a bonus, that if you give us something, we'll let you increase your coverage, your FAR, sorry.
And what we might then be presented with is that, because we've talked about the difficulty, there are practical difficulties in including affordable units in assisted living, and it might be some sort of contribution. So, are we willing to allow the grade of FAR for a more significant contribution for affordable housing?
I would,
Yes, I would, definitely.
because otherwise the payment into our affordable housing fund is like, we still have an issue about where that would go. I mean, we only have, limited properties that could be developed.
So wouldn't that fall under the clause that the board can just make that decision? Like, we don't have to change our existing FAR and bonus rules. We can use the clause that says we can make a change if it's in public interest.
Well, I
It's not
think
only the
that,
set, those only the
that was
setbacks.
only
Oh, it's only
for the
setback?
setback
And
and
only
the height.
specifically
That was all
says-
that, it wasn't a general provision.
I feel uncomfortable making it
Was this-
too broad.
was this setback
I thought
also?
the idea of
That was my
turning
question.
just to things like senior living was actually a benefit that you could kind of narrowly constrain where that extra extra FAR is going to come in.
But why not also cluster housing or housing, why only senior living?
Good point, housing.
Right, yeah, it's housing, where that could that's even better.
Right.
Because that would be real units of affordable housing.
I agree. I mean, not for offices, I mean, because
Right.
what's their benefit?
Affordable.
offices. Affordable restaurants. That could go.
Oh, we're back to station. But no, that's, I think that's where the balance,
Right, so the question is, does that become, how do we word that?
Well,
To
let
left.
me I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you're asking. You're saying FAR could be, make it to the FAR section.
It would have to be like a .1 bonus for up to affordable, up to.
Well, there would have to be some criteria, so. But we're saying in housing, if there's affordable housing, I just thought of it for the senior living, because that's what we talked is the constraint for the business case, that if you were trying to come in, what you need. So that's why I was trying to think if we coupled that, but I do think that coupled to housing in general might be able to be worded.
Well, what's the end of the sentence? Okay.
Okay, so
In
the
the
sentence
housing,
is
if there's affordable housing,
of some, according to some criteria, we could give up to a .1 FAR benefit. But it would be, what's the
that's perfect,
criteria?
that's incentivizing affordable housing, I love it.
But we'd have to figure out what that criteria is. I'm not sure what that would be.
Well, maybe a certain percentage per unit, or,
20% or something versus the 10 that we usually get. I don't know.
I don't know either.
But we can think about that.
and why just FAR? Why not also coverage? I mean, I think in regular,
I can say that the prior developers that came in for this project, I don't mean to interrupt, but that they came in and when the affordable regulation was added to the law, to your affordable regulation that's already in this law,
Yeah.
they walked immediately, that's in relevant part because of the affordability. If you add additional requirements or bonuses in this thing, you'd really need to add .2 to make it economically viable. So anytime you add sort of these type, it adds the need. It's sort of it's a slippery slope of the balance. So I appreciate that. I just wanted to clarify that those were reasons why, at least at the prior assisted living facility developer, FAR and other requirements.
But that was assuming that there would have to be a specific number of units within the facility that were designated affordable? Because
That was
we
part of each
recognize
piece.
that that's difficult.
Yes.
So if it was, if it could be a contribution or something where that
Right.
might not scare them off quite so much.
Exactly. So each piece of this, whether it's FAR, building height, all these things like traffic mitigation, all of these costs go into a pro forma, and each time you sort of take that out of the bucket, it makes it.
You asked for, we have,
Yeah.
it's our
Yeah.
formula too.
Right.
Come on.
Yeah.
I mean,
Again, I apologize to interrupt. I just.
I mean, I think we.
Thank you.
Yep. Give what we're saying, but I think we also have to.
Should be different.
I mean, I don't know if we're gonna be able to come up with
Yeah,
this correct
no, please.
We just kind of.
I mean,
It's something we did think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what we're being told by,
Is it, yeah,
by the,
it's not viable anyway.
it's not much anyways, but it would be viable for basic housing, so.
but the payment into the fund that we talked about is different from actually creating as many units on site. That was the alternate, right? That we could,
you know what, why don't we all think about
yes.
Yeah, I mean, think about, I mean, as you said, we got a half hour before, so.
Yeah,
I mean,
let's just think
I don't know
about
what
this
the
whole
alternatives
issue. Yeah, and it might be worth, at the end of this, I was gonna say, are any of these things we should want to do? I'm not sure.
This one in particular.
Yeah.
Is the one that we're really, there's a real, some balance there, I think.
I agree, and to me, it's even the increase in FAR, like what is it, to me, again, what does it actually mean? You have to go back and almost look at the kinds of things too.
Yeah, we had those
Okay,
calculations.
so let's just do these, there's just a couple more things, and then we'll talk about whether which project. Okay. Okay, they had suggested some language changes to the traffic provisions, and I'm working with, AKRF on fixing.
Okay, but
And nothing.
we already agreed it's gonna be of the same nature of the.
Yeah, they're just little tweaks in language and stuff, it's not any big change. Okay, and then Maxon suggested, language, well, not this language, but this idea, that no special permit may be issued for use using Strawberry Lane for access or egress unless the applicant makes whatever improvements are necessary to ensure and maintain safe passage over Strawberry Lane. That's what's in there now. But that it be limited to the portion of Strawberry Lane that the applicant will be using. So I thought maybe you could say from Broadway to the point on Strawberry Lane where the use has access or egress onto Strawberry Lane or something like that. So that if you're just using the lower part, you don't have to improve the whole of Strawberry Lane to the end. I think that makes sense.
I am,
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I'm not, I'm just really worried about, I'm actually worried about just adding more traffic to Strawberry Lane with or without improvements. I mean, the thing is, how do they improve the southeast corner? How do they improve access, safety to Broadway? Some of these things are gonna be things that they can't necessarily do, so.
Well, if they can't, then they can't do it. It says no special permit may be issued for use using Strawberry Lane for access or egress unless the applicant makes whatever improvements are necessary to ensure and maintain safe passage over Strawberry Lane.
And
So if they can-
on to Broadway.
And if it can't be
If
done,
someone's only using from a point on Strawberry Lane, aren't they also going the other way to exit out onto Riverview? Wouldn't some people be exiting onto
Well,
Riverview?
well, let's say on the Maxon property, you somehow did something that you did one of those parallel roads you were talking about, and it came,
Drawing it here, but
and it
like
came,
one way in, you come out the same way.
and it came out like, 20 feet above Broadway. They only have to improve from Broadway to get 20 feet to your access.
And I would put, what we were proposing in that scenario too is that we could put a breakaway gate over the original exit, which could be for emergency access, but that would limit anyone going up Strawberry Lane into the site. So it's all rules to preserve any potential impacts to Strawberry Lane.
We don't go up, we only go
Piece of
down.
land, you can maybe do something, but it's even behind the wall. You know, I'm not sure. I'm no engineer, but.
That's the problem.
Right, but I'm thinking if you make it that much, that much wider, so it's not almost, more right turn only, I don't know.
I don't know.
I'm suspect of that. I know what you're trying to get at, but I'm suspect of how that.
Yeah, right.
improves feasibility.
Well, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Potentially.
As long as it's,
As long as there's no additional traffic going, it's going to be going up on Strawberry.
well, as long as it's not to the greatest extent practicable, that kind of language, if it's,
Well, it's not,
Doesn't say that.
I know, I just,
or anything like it. It says
pretty
ensure
concrete.
safe passage, yeah. I think it's pretty clear. All right, I don't know, do you guys want to talk to Ashley about the FAR thing, or?
well, I think it really impacts, I mean, there's a coverage issue, there's a FAR, you've got a massing issue.
Because I do feel like her analysis is what brought us to the point 3.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense to probably talk to her about it.
So what are we asking her?
Almost what,
Well, I'll tell, I'll tell her what the issue is, and ask her to, address it.
To make, what would we not?
Yeah. Really
Well,
not
but-
figure out what
yeah.
makes sense.
Sure.
Whether she should come to, board meeting and explain to you whether she should submit something in writing, whatever.
Would we ever classify, Abbott House as a historic building? Just like, the reason I'm asking is, didn't we all say that, for instance, and everyone observed that the Garfield White Mansion is actually not a historic building?
No,
It's
it's
a modern.
No,
I think that was the 1920s hospital.
Well,
We have a local landmark law
Do you
and
need
we could, they can
Consent of the
apply.
homeowner.
What?
With the consent of the property owner.
Sure.
Right,
Yes,
I'm
with
just
the
wondering.
consent of the property owner.
Yeah, but-
Is it historic?
It doesn't have to be designated, remember that the planning board has, to. I mean, the ARB has to find that it has significant,
That's sort of,
Historical,
and I think
right,
you probably be the case, right?
and I think you might.
But in addition, there is the local landmark law.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but that's
Yes,
different than,
yes.
I'm just wondering if those buildings would ever fall under the criteria. In other words, because I was worried about that, that if all of Abbott House becomes historical, then this kind of,
yeah,
the benefit is like extreme, because you could build another whole.
that's the one that jumped out to me, because it
Right.
seems, and maybe even something today that doesn't seem like it's any big deal. The house I grew up in, this bungalow on the south side of Chicago, only 4 people lived, Gus, and now they're historical. Yeah, fortunately, my brother never moved out, so we're just gonna say nothing. But I mean, so what, nobody ever would have thought this
Right.
historical and,
Yeah, although I can't imagine that out school building at Abbott House will ever be.
well, not the school part, but the other,
The hospital, I think you can't have a
and that other
caretaker
building is
building.
exactly the sort of building that they may well wanna keep up.
Oh, yeah.
Because you can't build anything that high and the views are fabulous. And, all right, okay, well, we got a lot, we got most of these
Good job.
things done. Okay. I'll make the changes, I will do a copy, and then we'll talk to Ashley about it.
So the next item is planning for the public meeting and review maps and park rules. This was really, a little bit of history. We had, RPAC had scheduled public hearings on the opening of Madison Park due to kind of the social media debate, to put it nicely. I basically said I didn't think it was fair to have RPAC have to deal with kind of a topic that has the potential to divide Irvington. I think this is an issue that we can have an adult conversation with and it won't divide Irvington. But I also think it's important that we have, kind of a decent kind of plan on how to present it. So along those lines, I think, Larry and I were talking, the appropriate time might be the next work session, which is, I believe, December 11th. That we would have, the kind of the presentation of, the village attorney's findings on the deeds. So I think is, I think it's been out there that, it looks like they might not be as, restrictive as people I thought for the last 90 years or whatever it is. But I guess 70 years. So I think we'll, I think once and for all discuss all that, get that out to the public once and for all. I think then I would ask RPAC to present, kind of their thoughts and findings on the use of the park and things like that. Then I would ask for any input from other village departments if they felt they, had something to say, whether that's the police department, the fire department, DPW, whoever that would be. Can't imagine the library would have a view, but if they want to say something, feel free. And then have input from the public. And, I think that.
At the work session.
At the work session. Almost have kind of it wouldn't be a traditional work session. It would be, just kind of a special work session where we could hear from both sides. This board could then digest.
And this would be the only topic on the
I was just
agenda.
thinking that. I was thinking that was.
Or something very minor, like, voting in raises for the board of trustees. And the right department. And RPAC. But, so I think, and that would be, then I think we would digest that, and then we would come back when we kind of, felt we had enough information. I think, we might have to ask for more information coming out of something like that. Might have some really interesting new ideas that we'll have to pursue and think about. And then, we could make a decision on, opening it up, not opening it up, what we would have to do if we wanted to open it up or not open it up. And then make that decision when we were ready. I think, but this is at least I haven't actually read the 2 articles, the pros and cons articles. I can't bring myself to do it. But, I think,
Oh, and the husband defense?
yeah, I want to,
You weren't there.
No, they weren't there.
I haven't read them yet, that's all.
No, you just
One of the others is anyway.
no, they weren't.
Reading from him, like an audiobook.
I mean, they weren't.
No, they were reasonable
Yeah.
statements.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. I thought it was very balanced.
I haven't read it yet, so.
Yeah.
So, and then we would just make a decision that, I don't think we need,
Isn't that what Lindsey Graham said too?
so, so that's kind of my plan. If you guys have tweaks or thoughts on that,
I haven't thought about it.
okay.
One of the biggest things I have is the issue of the actual impacts on a park like Madison. And I think it's different than the impact on a park like St. Hudson. And, we've heard some anecdotal stories about impacts, negative impacts in Dobbs Ferry and in Terrytown and across from Rockland. So I feel like, in a way, maybe we don't have, or have we spent time, has anyone spent time trying to look at parks that weren't negatively impacted? In other words, things that were kind of successful in a more open access environment, and what kinds of things were done to make them, so they became successful. We've talked about informally about in Madison Park about resources, managing resources, so like picnic tables, barbecue pits, whatever, so that you could at least have some semblance of a nice time going there, like especially on weekends, rather than having just a total nightmare in terms of access to facilities.
So hopefully that would be something that we might hear in the public
Or ask
comments
for.
that happen. And if we don't, at the end of that work session, we're gonna have time to sort of research.
We're not, the work session isn't gonna be make a final plan here.
No, I'm just saying that I think that we need to be clear that we're looking for that information, and however we get it, we have to, figure out a mechanism to get that.
DOT road trip.
I think,
Successful part.
I think this board has always been pretty good at looking at other examples to help inform us, and it just needs to be a wide net. You need to look at a lot of examples, and we can certainly, start that process or wait till this meeting, but.
And I think we can also learn from the mistakes that other
Oh,
municipalities make.
that's my
Yeah,
point.
and also model ourselves on
Yeah,
good ones.
right.
We haven't heard necessarily the great ones. We've heard about the problems and
Yeah,
where
well,
they go
Well,
wrong.
That's a very important,
I have only one thing to help focus it, and that is that one thing we have to be aware of is that Madison Park's unique in structure, not from all other parks, but the unique feature is the waterfront, right? The river access. So parks like in Dobbs Ferry or in Terrytown or Cold Spring, those kind of riverfront parks.
Croton Point Park.
All of those are things that would be appropriate,
Yeah,
whereas
more directly.
others sort of like
Right.
the Spring Park or whatever it's called, Spring Ridge Park, doesn't seem like it would be appropriate. Maybe if there was a water body somewhere, it would be appropriate, but certainly, I think we should probably, as opposed to tilted at windmills, we should be looking at river parks,
Comparable.
Yes, that's what I'm, thank you, I could have said that, but not.
there are parts on the Sound also.
Yes, I mean,
Water on the other doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't have to be a river, but you get what I'm trying to get at.
And there.
Yes, exactly. So I think we can think about this now.
And I think that if we hear from the public and we hear from our PAC, who's looked at a bunch of parks, and we think we still don't have enough information, there's no, it's also, the practical thing is the park's gonna be closed for renovations for 6 months. Is that right, Jen, 6 months?
Yes.
So,
This winter.
it's not like, if we don't have, I think and I haven't seen it frankly, I know it's not on social media that this is festering, but I think that if we kind of let people be heard, I think we have a constructive conversation, which I'm very confident we can do. We've done with a lot of issues, all the issues pretty much, that we can turn this into something that we can, all feel pretty darn good about at the end of the day, so.
And we might hear something we haven't considered.
Exactly right.
And I
That's
think
the-
also it'll give an opportunity for each side to hear
The other.
what the other side has to say in a civil
In a civil setting.
setting.
Where
And
no
really have
social
people
media is
understand that
allowed.
there's probably a middle ground, that there's probably a middle ground that we can find.
I agree. So that's kind of my plan for that. I think it's important that people be heard. I think it's important we hear from people. And
Now,
I
people
think
can write emails ahead of time for ideas that we haven't heard, and certainly can read something on that public hearing, and it won't be, not a public hearing, that discussion.
yeah.
And
Public
then
discussion.
there can certainly be time after that to pursue those issues that come up.
Yep.
And
Yeah, we're not assuming this one session will
Yeah.
result in the final plan. This is
No.
really information and input.
But it should be enough.
And the reason I want to cover this, get this settled as to how we're gonna go forward is so that we can publicize
What,
what the next step is, and that'll elicit
Yeah,
comments, of
especially
course.
because we kind of, I personally short-stopped the whole process that was starting, so we just want to kind of get it back out there.
I also agree, Brian, that I think our PAC should have, the fact that we sort of took this away from them doesn't in any way minimize,
No.
their opinion and the work that they've already done.
No.
So I think, it's important that they're heard from.
I agree. And I think it was more
Either
that
it was a group or even individual.
we thought it was unfair to have them manage something like this as opposed to we didn't, kind of value their opinion on this.
Great.
And they got that message
Yeah, I think so.
across.
I think we told them.
and then you want to communicate to the other department
Telling right
heads
now.
that they're welcome to share anything that they want to share.
Right, I would love to hear from DPW.
Sure.
Yeah.
The IBD.
All right, so it's December 11th? It's the 13th, sorry,
Oh, what did we
the 11th, no, the December, wait a minute.
No, second,
Sorry.
9th.
Maybe I got that right.
December 11th.
11.
December 11th, yes, is a Wednesday.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay,
Lucky.
to be continued, all right.
You're away, Rick?
Yeah, I'm on vacation till the 13th.
And
Correct.
I've just decided to go on vacation.
Oh, come on, Joe. Be tough. Be tough.
Okay,
All right,
so
next.
I'm gonna ask just one thing, and then I'm gonna, is this getting us behind on other things that we should be dealing with in terms of a work session? In other words, should this be a standard work session or an additional session? You know what I'm saying? So that we can cover other stuff at a standard work, like dark sky, whatever we have on our plate. I'm just worried about it really delaying a lot of other stuff.
Well, I mean, I think somebody like Dark Sky, I would imagine would be a relatively, potentially not a super long discussion, so maybe do
I
both
think
those.
we can narrow issues on that.
Well, you're not saying do that at the session where we're talking about Matheson Park. I really think that has to be dedicated to that. That's
That's
not
what
going to
I'm
be
saying.
I think it's enough for one evening, but,
But we have
No, I think the question is, do we
Yeah.
schedule something
yeah,
special?
exactly, yeah, I thought of that,
That's a
but
special session.
Let's see how many things we have.
if we need to have,
Yeah, I just want to say, I was
We're gonna do a second work session for dark sky. but-
And other things,
just like
right,
Sky.
right.
Right, no, I mean, if there's enough.
We might have stuff about Broadway corridor.
Yeah, there might be some, and it's commercial parking,
There's a number of things that are still down, but I'd like to see us maintain movement.
Yeah, but we can also.
Right, and I'd much rather have a separate meeting where we can give everything its due attention rather than trying
so
to.
then
Oh,
there's,
yeah, no, I
You
wouldn't have
try
put,
to do that, yeah.
there's
no, I wouldn't
December
have put it all together.
16th then,
Yeah, I mean, it's typically the closer, the later we go in December like that, December 16th meeting might be like one of those hybrid work sessions where we.
Well, that's
talk about-
exactly what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so
That's
we
something
I think
like that.
we'll anticipate, we'll see how many other agenda items we have.
let's not have a meeting on the 25th.
If we need to schedule, but we don't have to decide that now.
I think we should
Okay.
for next week.
And everybody will be in wonderful holiday spirits, so it will be.
Yep.
Good, next.
Okay, so we're ready to go on to the fun thing?
Priorities.
so,
Is it very manageable until you're out to double sided?
yeah, exactly. So there's no, oh, I'm sorry, yes, I meant to hand that out. Thank
I
you.
know, oh, you gave me one.
Yes, I gave you one before.
All right.
Larry, is that
I guess, is that, is that public, the priorities, or is that still
Yeah.
in flux and it'll become public later on? If I wanted to find that, where would I find it?
Under the Board of Trustees,
Uh-huh.
there's a section for priorities and by year.
Okay, and so that form will be,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Something similar,
Good,
yeah.
good, good, thanks. Thanks.
So, there's no particular roadmap through this, and I wasn't planning on touching on every single item, of course. You do receive your weekly updates that kind of, sort of look like this, so
Christmas tree?
for every individual item, but I can touch on some of the more significant projects, and then if there's anything in particular, certainly I can answer any questions you might have, but.
So can I just ask a point of process here?
Yeah.
This is stuff that we've worked on. This is is this a new a version of something?
No.
Or is this what we worked on 6 months ago or whatever?
Yeah, over the summer, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so,
yeah, this is not new.
yeah, that's what I just.
We
wanted
worked
to-
on it, but you put it in this form.
Well, this is what you
This is
approved. This is what you approved.
Right, so
Okay.
what you're going over now is just giving us.
Just giving you an update.
Updates.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to
Yes.
get the context.
That's what was requested back in the summer. I think it came up here at a meeting that you wanted to get, periodic updates.
Okay.
Oh, right, I get it.
So not
So this is your.
periodic updates.
Status, periodic updated priorities instead of status.
Okay, I'll make note of that. This is your periodic update. Next one will be in 2025. Okay, so, no, but,
We'll be off it either.
but in all seriousness, I'm not going to go through this one by one, but I will say, with the first item, one of the things that Marianne and I did fairly recently, as it relates to the comprehensive plan, was to identify the remaining items, some of the remaining action items that are left in the comprehensive plan. Marianne prompted that discussion, and it was very helpful. So there'll be things like, of course, Broadway rezoning we're dealing with, but there's also recommendations dealing with use of pervious materials or encouraging pervious materials, steep slope law, cluster provision, breweries and distilleries. And then, yeah, exactly. So and then the
I'm gonna rubber stamp that one.
and of course
Is there anything else besides?
That's the one on
these?
Christmas Eve.
and then the commercial and oversized vehicles, which you're already dealing with. So
So we're
but
pretty.
it hasn't been moving.
We're moving right along, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that.
Mention of that.
Ball on.
So although the priorities for the actual what you adopted didn't have that kind of detail, the tracking sheet, if you choose to look at it, does actually start tracking it, and we haven't the few of those things in the middle there we haven't started working on yet, but that's certainly that's what's ahead of us.
Oh, good.
So for the Town Hall Theater, which is item number 4 on the primary focus list, that, as you know, is moving forward. It's a very large project, but the fundraising consultant's been hired, and that process is moving along. But this is going to be on this primary focus list for a number of years,
Feasibility study itself will take years.
Yeah, exactly. So that remains to be seen. Matheson Park improvements, obviously you approve the design contract. The schedule on that is that we are pushing for design to be done in the winter, with bidding to be done late winter, with contract award and ready to do construction basically by the spring and proceed through the summer.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Was there any formal list of requirements, like that the park needs? You know what I mean? A program, a desired program. Was that, did we get an outline of all of that presented to us, or is that just sort of been?
That was presented when the capital project was requested, as I
Yes,
recall.
I
Joe
remember
was
that.
here to present
I'm
that
trying
now.
to remember what we got presented. I know we.
They talked about the nature of the playground.
Yeah, with the splash pad and the
I think
the
Janet
pathways.
Kovacs talked about it.
Okay, so just as
She
long
was
as
on
there's a
that committee.
context
Yeah.
for the design group to actually have a official program to work from.
You know, that's what the volunteers worked on for
Months.
months,
Months.
yeah, with
Yeah,
with
that
the
whole group
designer.
came and presented, yeah.
Yeah, I asked questions about the playgrounds, I remember,
Mhm.
because I always been interested in that.
And they talked about the pathways and the wide pathways.
Using the
Remember
bikes
some of
and
that,
stuff.
yeah.
I think, there must be a way, if you don't, it must be in a printed form.
But we certainly have conceptual design documents, and
Yeah.
now they're even more more than
Yeah.
just conceptual, of course.
But it's interesting, Mark, from what I remember, and maybe you did miss that meeting, I'm not sure, but you should look at it, it's interesting, it was a good discussion.
I mean, I can circulate
Yeah.
some of the basic documents to begin with, you know,
Yeah,
it's not that it's a formal
Maybe
study.
that was the one meeting I missed.
Yeah, could be.
Right, because
This is about
I mean, I
math.
know
Maths
it
and
kind
book.
of through osmosis, I know some of
It's
the
an
stuff.
extensive
Right.
presentation, there was a lot, so you should see it.
Did it, visited a bunch of places. And
Right,
Yeah,
the type of playgrounds that the
it was
little kids wanted, and the
integral
older
with,
kids wanted, and
right.
what was high on their list.
It
and
was
low on
integral with
list.
the capital budget
Yeah.
that you were in the process of approving.
Okay, now, sorry, now that Larry's back, can we talk about number 5 for a moment?
Wow, we got to number 5?
Sure. Well, no, I'm jumping around to some of the major, but that's what I talked about to begin with, is I'm hitting on some of the major projects, and if there's anything in particular that you want to ask about, certainly go ahead. So,
Yeah, number 5, I just want to say that, Larry was spearheading getting some ideas together, talking with John Malone and George Boyle from the planning board and myself in terms of ideas to help the process of planning board approval or just creating a subset of projects that didn't have the same overall load on them, shall we say, in terms of costs and time frame. So that's moving ahead, and I think Larry and I was,
We're gonna try to meet, I know you and I had a conversation about that as well.
Yep.
And Mark and I are gonna try to sort of finalize that document,
I gave a bunch of feedback to you.
hopefully sooner rather than later.
And the second part of that was I was talking to Ed about the paperless submissions, and so I do think, and you're probably up to speed with what he's talking about, but
yeah, I mean, I know the broad.
he's sort of looking like maybe as early as January, February.
It's happening, yes.
Yeah, it
Oh,
seems
yeah.
already happening,
Yeah.
and I just, word that it looks like, I spoke to him pretty extensively the other day about it, and he's very, somewhere between satisfied and proud about it, and I think he should be, and he's got things he needs to correct, but it sounds like it would address a lot of our issues and seriously reduce the amount of paper copies, and really would move us toward electronic review. And I think that it's a perfect time, and we're talking about some real new, staffing on the ZBA. We're talking about new staffing or new members to the planning board. And I know who could then adopt the practice without as much hesitancy.
It's the only process they know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
I think this is a good
This is
point
like-
to be introducing some of these changes.
And I do know that ARB has been crying for it.
Yeah.
All the members of the ARB, the architects and stuff are like going, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's just been a challenge because of meeting schedules and, the need for, 2 ARB meetings a month, and some of that presented challenges in terms of the workflow and the paper flow, or the
But
non-paper
it sounds
flow.
like I was really impressed. I thought it sounded like it's brought it quite far along.
Yeah, no, it's on the priority list, but
Yeah.
it's certainly
So
a
it's
priority
really-
at this.
yeah, just to-
Yeah.
so-
Good. Well, let's see, real quick on the EV charging stations, there's been obviously an enormous frustration from my standpoint. We still don't have power at the locations we need. What we are trying to do is push DPW to have the pad installed in the Aqueduct lot, and we'll probably look to apply for and receive our incentive to purchase the equipment itself. But at least we'll be ready for that, and hopefully that'll get done before the winter, where we can't
What was the second location determined?
It's down by the library, but that's in the southern end of the library parking lot. But that one has its own challenges from where the power is getting pulled. It's a
So
little,
it's
it's a
still the
little
Con
dicey.
Ed issue, it's still the Con Ed.
Up here at the aqueduct is most definitely the Con Ed issue.
Wow.
Is there any way that anyone has any clue how to push that forward?
I mean, we've only been working through our electrician who routinely deals with Con Ed on these issues, and they are pushing as hard as they can. But
I'm wondering, like, do we need to bring in some political help, like,
Could be.
Stuart Cousins or someone like that to apply
right,
some?
Abenante more likely, actually.
Yeah, okay, so,
Yeah.
to apply some leverage, maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe.
let's definitely call him, I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
But we're gonna try to move, at least get the equipment purchased and installed, and, that's, at least move that forward.
Up to charge, but there's no electricity.
You're gonna
Well, yeah.
imagine.
We'll have a bag over it.
It's a very slow trickle.
We'll give you a cut too.
Yeah.
Just need solar for now.
On some of, this is now on the backside, on some of the larger projects, obviously the crosswalk's done at Broadway and Heritage. We did talk about Broadway and Main, and frankly, the state has that scheduled for reconfiguration, so we're waiting on them for that. We're not going to be doing any work in the Broadway Main intersection. Like I said, that's on their list of intersections that they have to address. Station Road and Main Street, we are done with our design work. All has been approved by the state, ready for bidding. We expect to bid by the end of this month and have a fairly long bid window into the middle of the winter, but have the bidding again, end by the end of the winter and contracts awarded after that.
So, related to this, and I just don't know if I'm seeing, if it's ahead, but the smart crosswalks?
Right.
Is that somewhere in here?
It is. It's the one right above that. Implement advanced crosswalk technology.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So
Where are we on that? Do we have enough for 2 sidewalks, or do we have only enough for 1?
we have enough for one at this point. I think the plan was to put that, or at least to try to put that up at the aqueduct crossing. But I'm still working through with the engineers to see exactly where the equipment can go and how it can be positioned. But we had to wait on that until the paving got done, and the paving finally got done. So we'll work on that through the winter and hopefully see something in the spring is my hope.
So there was some question also about radar versus push button, right? Something like that.
I think it was automatic trip versus push button was the question. Yeah,
Radar, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah.
It could be,
Radar sounds cooler.
well, it could be visual detection, but whatever, it was auto detection versus push button.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we haven't made a decision on that, so I can circle back when we see what the
Well, I was
differences
just
are
gonna
in
report
costs.
to you that the traffic committee's attitude is they think that the push button is probably makes the most sense.
Yeah, that's where I would have leaned on it as well.
So,
Yeah.
then,
Yeah, it raises the awareness, frankly, so.
and also then there's no mistake. Yes,
The awareness of the pedestrian, yeah, exactly. Right, there's a value to that, yeah. Hudson View Park, obviously, that's proceeding. It's been a long project. We are significantly over budget because of the rock. I can't tell you exactly how much over budget because some of it is going to be borne by Con Edison, and so we haven't figured out what that split is. But we still are pushing for the end of this month for the majority of that work to be complete. They're, anyway. So
Are
that's,
we providing front lawns back to people? Or how?
well,
What's the state of the restoration?
we'll restore it as much as the weather will allow us to restore it. So they're really starting to pour curbs and sidewalks and put a little bus stop in there, where there was a bus stop. And,
I'm thinking more like in the spring, isn't the village just, is committed, or that was part of the agreement to restore lawns and stuff?
yeah, it's we have money in the budget for landscaping at each of the properties. So that'll get taken care of, whether it gets taken care of in this planting season, which we may miss, or, yeah, so, or next year.
For lawns,
Yeah.
for lawns, yes, that's it.
So it'll be secured over the winter, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, let's see, we talked about building approvals, environmental action plan is kind of
Where are
getting
we at?
full.
I'm sorry, I'm lost. with-
No, I'm down in 8, 9, and 10 on the backside of this page. You know, the environmental action plan's kind of gotten folded into this whole pursuing of the climate smart community certification, which is well underway. So that's not, climate smart communities is not necessarily on this list, but it's,
Can we change 9 then, to sort of like
Yeah, I mean,
encompass the, because it sounds like it's really being superseded by.
yeah, that's fine, sure, makes sense. So, and if there's anything else in particular, or,
Well, I mean,
Making good
under,
progress and-
in some, yeah, in other areas, not as much, but,
We gotta get more bodies, we gotta get more volunteers.
Well, we went through a fairly positive process with looking for people for the
Yeah.
planning board.
Yeah.
We had people interested, some good candidates.
But none yet that would go directly to the board, right? I mean, they're both, or
we,
did we just?
do you want to chat in exec?
volunteer
Yeah,
appointment should
I
be.
mean,
we don't have to do it tonight.
I think I summarized it in an email, so if
Yeah, this does not have
you
to
were
be.
in agreement with what I wrote.
No, I would just add on the same track, on number 10, on the top part of the back page about volunteerism and boards. I think it's a good idea, you and I have spoken about having the boards come in at work sessions.
Yes.
Yes.
and give descriptions or
Yep.
updates and
I
what.
mean, we talked about the farmer's market committee coming back. I
Yeah,
think
but
we
that's a good example,
should Move
sure.
on that too.
So that's slightly different than 10.
They'll come in once
So
they.
periodically review.
Right.
But just to check in, yeah.
Busy.
Yeah, it's just hard balancing all that out, because I know you also, at some point, wanted to periodically see some of your departments come in, because
Yeah.
you enjoy hearing from them, not just during budget season, so
Right.
that's
That's true.
Well, as long as they come
there's a
in,
lot to juggle there with one work session a month, so.
as long as they come in with like a 5-minute PowerPoint and that,
Yeah, no,
Maybe a snack.
I have not.
From the farmer's
But like a 20-minute presentation of multiple committees and stuff, at some point, it's like, we don't have the time.
right.
Well, we want to have the time.
Executive session then?
Yeah, so we're going to ask you to adjourn to executive session.
I'll make the motion. Can I get a second?
Real estate
Real
matter,
estate.
or real estate matter.
I gotta get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.